Good morning. It's morning here. A good day to everyone watching. Warm welcome. We're going to talk today about Ignatius of Antioch and a very curious connection with Peregrinus Proteus, relayed to us by Lucian of Samosata. Other scholars have done the same thing. Notice that there are actually parallels, quite interesting ones, between these two characters. Ignatius probably written into Christianity by later authors as a very interesting figure, because he asserts and reasserts that there has to be historical Jesus here at a time, obviously, when lots of people are still clinging on, as far as I'm concerned, to a Gnostic approach in understanding here a celestial Jesus. But Ignatius's story, as relayed by people like Irenaeus, and in more of a bulky fashion by Eusebius, is probably just made up. This is why this is interesting, because we're going to find that there are quite a few parallels between Peregrinus here and Ignatius, and even in the name Ignatius itself, which is quite interesting. So let's go. Ignatius of Antioch, of course, supposed bishop of Antioch and executed under Trajan in around 107, according to later tradition, church tradition. The main sources here are obviously his epistles, but Eusebius, later martyrdom story here. Peregrinus Proteus, cynic philosopher and wandering ascetic, dies by self-immolation at Olympia about 165 CE. So this is from Lucian, the death of Peregrinus 165 CE there. And the narrative parallels now. The motifs here, so we'll just go through them. Imprisoned as a holy man. Okay, so both Ignatius and Peregrinus are, and Ignatius is en route here to Rome for execution, and and Peregrinus imprisoned in Palestine for his beliefs, visited and venerated by followers. Again, Christians meet him, bring gifts, send letters. Christians bring gifts and show devotion in Lucian 13. So again, similar here, Peregrinus, Christian connections. Desires martyrdom. Let me be food for beasts. Here's a letter to the Romans 4 here. Peregrinus longs for a spectacular death, later burns himself. Occultic devotion, followers see him as a sanctified individual, and in Peregrinus here, Christians revered him as a god, Lucian 11. Letters sent from prison, 7 epistles to the churches are sent by Ignatius. That's his authentic letter collection. Lucian notes letters and messengers came to him. Exaggerated self-importance. I am God's wheat here, Ignatius says this, and Peregrinus, Lucian mocks his gratuitously Lucian mocks Peregrinus's grandiosity and egotism. So we see the same kind of personality coming through here. Condemnation by civic power. Executed by the Romans, according to Christian tradition, for Ignatius, and imprisoned by governors for impiety and Lucian says this about Peregrinus. Final death as spectacle. Obviously, Ignatius is devoured by beasts, kind of symbolically and very mythologically sounding. It's just mythic sounding stuff. And Peregrinus here publicly immolates himself at Olympia. So we actually get it's interesting. Greek stage language, elevated and dramatic, cynic, showmanship and performance here in both cases, really. Name and symbolic resonance here. Ignatius. from ignis, right? Latin for fire, ignite, to set something on fire, symbolic of burning zeal, divine flame. Peregrinus here, Latin for wanderer and stranger, also biblical epithet for the pilgrim saint. Peregrinus dies by fire, self-immolation, literally fulfilling the ignis theme associated with Ignatius's name. Scholars of law noted this uncanny linguistic irony. Ignatius, the fiery one, and Peregrinus here, the stranger, embody two sides of the same archetype, the fiery, wandering martyr. Okay? The literary and thematic overlaps. Now, I hope people can get through this. It's not going to be too long, this video, but it is. I think it's going to be interesting for people who do like this stuff. And I know I'm only going out here to a few people who are going to go through the whole thing. But I just like doing this, and for your edification, I'm happy to do this. And let's go. Eagerness for heroic death. Okay, in both cases, pleads with Christians not to save him. Romans 7 declares intent to burn himself alive. Lucian 20, charismatic ascetic preaches abstinence, unity and obedience. Peregrinus here, again, lives an ascetic cynic, rejected family and wealth, lives as an ascetic cynic. Spiritual pride, for both, again, it claims to be, so Ignatius claims to be speaking with divine authority, and Peregrinus proclaims himself new Socrates, mocked. And he's, of course, mocked by Lucian. Theatrical martyrdom here. Again, martyrdom as imitation of Christ. Suicide in Peregrinus. Suicide as demonstration of cynic purity. Public adoration. Christians revere him as a saint. Lucian notes crowds treat him like a god. Okay, letters as testaments, authentic or pseudonymous Ignatian epistles. So another letters here in Lucian notes ongoing correspondence to him in prisons, anticipated apotheosis, yearns to be united with God, and Lucian says followers believed him immortal. Okay, scholarly views now. The traditional view, of course, two unrelated figures, Ignatius a real martyr, Peregrinus a pagan fraud. Supports Catholic and mainstream scholars, this one. Parody theory, though. Lucian's Peregrinus deliberately mocks Ignatian martyr cult. Okay, this is the parody theory. So W.R. Cassels, Herman Dettering, and R. Price here, Richard Price, I believe this. So parody theory, then Lucian's Peregrinus deliberately mocks this Ignatian parody cult. So whether Ignatius is true or not, he's talking in the 160s. This is about 50 years after this supposed event's supposed to have taken place. So we can see maybe this Peregrinus here being created to mock Ignatius's whole thing just by giving him a different name. The identity conflation theory, though, Ignatius and Peregrinus reflect the same archetype of historical kernel, later recast differently. So this is Carrier believes this, L. Doherty again, P.L. Cushaud as well believe this. Or the literary dependency here. Ignatian epistles borrow tropes from cynic martyr, law, or Lucianic satire. So this is what I'm basically going for here. I think it's probable that when we get this story, remember we only get this story from Eusebius. Okay, so this is what's this now, 150 years or something after Lucian's work here. The Peregrinus, and it looks as though this might be what's happened here. So the Christians are looking at these, as they are wont to do with many different things, and many martyrdom stories are often copies from older pagan myths. So there are a number of theories here that could go either way. I don't believe that it's truly, these are unrelated figures. I do believe that there's something in the notion here that they may be connected. I don't think I'm just looking at a series of coincidences and saying this must have happened this way. The archetypal frame here, again, this is plausible, and the notion of a figure who's ultimately righteous and good and wants to die for his beliefs here. So the pagans didn't really believe too much in martyrdom, not as the Christians did, but they did completely understand that to give yourself to a noble cause, to fight in war and give yourself over to death for the good of Rome, say, was a thing to do. But I think here what's more likely is that there's a literary dependency. Lucian comes along, he's already talking about Christians. He's made this, he's talking about this Peregrinus figure. Maybe he existed, maybe he didn't. But then the Christians later on are trying to pad out a story for Ignatius. And they did the same thing for the martyrdom of Polycarp. So I don't see any problem with this. I don't think it's 100% absolutely affirmed certainty, but I think it's worth, just putting it out there anyway. So the chronological elasticity here, Ignatius's martyrdom under Trajan is first dated only by Eusebius in the 4th century. His letters likely belong to the mid-2nd century, or contemporaneous with Lucian, if we can say even that the 3 authentic letters, the 3 most likely to be authentic, are in fact authentic. I think there's something going on there. But who knows, man. If so, Lucian could easily have known of the Ignatian cult, or vice versa, right? Archetypal parallels. Both men represent the formative archetypal kind of martyr. Itinerant ascetic, renouncing the world. Stage managed death for glory. Letters or publicity before death. Audience of followers interpreting the act as divine. One is canonized, the other satirized. Okay. Anyway, the conclusion, again, it looks as though, and I just ran a little, what's the probability here? Not even a Bayesian hypothesis, but the evidence weight here. Okay, separate historical figures, 55% basically. Lucian parodying Ignatian cult, 30%. Overlapping motifs and timing. Same figure later historicized differently, and linguistic thematic coincidences is about 15%. Okay, so I think it's probable that the Christians needed a story here for Ignatius. They'd already heard of an Ignatius, didn't really know much about him. Obviously, if they had, they would have said more. But there's really very little going on. And then, of course, the big story comes along with Eusebius, as he is wont to do, or to conveniently leave out certain things as well, which we've seen. So the overlap between Ignatius and Peregrinus is too rich to dismiss as mere coincidence. Both dramatized death as spectacle. Both are revered or ridiculed as holy men. Both embody the fusion of ascetic charisma and public theatre that characterized the rise of martyrdom ideology. Okay, thus, whether Lucian knew Ignatius directly or merely his legend, Peregrinus, Proteus, likely, or his writers, the writers of the Ignatius' story here, likely served as Proteus here, likely served as a satirical mirror of the very martyr model that Ignatius came to represent in Christian memory later on, the fiery wanderer who sought immortality through death. Okay, now I'll leave that there. Peace and love. It's again really worth, I think, putting all of this stuff. I really want to build out. I've done some work on the chain of custody here. What's it called? The from the earliest Christians. What's that called? The chain of the connections between the epistles, John, Polycarp, and so on. There's so little that people know these big names in second century Christianity, they really don't have much of a clue, and some of their writings here sound a bit dodgy. There's a confusion between the different Johns here in Papias and so on. So there really isn't much to apostolic succession. That was what I was looking for. Apostolic succession. So it's reasonably granted as what you would see on minimal history, or just completely mythic celestial savior who's then becoming a real person later on and being reverse euhemerized. So I'll leave that there. Thank you very much for watching. There are probably only a couple of people that are going to stay till the end. I don't mind. It's all good. Thank you if you made it to the end. Peace out.